भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवांसस्तनूभिः व्यसेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति न पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. O Almighty God, let us be capable of performing sacrifices and hear only auspicious sounds with our ears and see auspicious forms with our eyes. With strong and steady limbs and body and remaining prayerful throughout our life, let us spend our God-given life directing our minds to only auspicious things. Om peace. Peace, peace. Now we are dealing with the second chapter of the Mandukya Karika, as I already mentioned. Just I would like you to recollect the background. The Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, which contains only 12 verses, explain the reality which is one which is attributeless, which is immanent in all beings, all-pervading and transcendental. And this reality can be experienced if we analyze our own true self. If we look upon ourselves as the witness, which experiences different things, different objects during the three states of our existence, the waking, the dreaming and deep sleep states. Whatever we see and experience in these three states of waking, dreaming and deep sleep states, they change. All the objects that we see, they change. But the one who sees all these objects remains without any change. The seer, the witnesser, remains the same. But the seen, what is witnessed, what is experienced, changes. And whatever changes, whatever undergoes change, cannot be absolutely real. They are not absolutely unreal either. They are only relative entities. Things that we look upon as realities so long as we are in a state of ignorance. When we realize our own true nature as the witness, the changeless one reality, the seer, the experiencer, then we will realize the changing objects as objects are only relative or unreal, but in reality the objects which are seen are non-different from the seer. What is seen is not different from the seer. This truth becomes a matter of our intuitive experience when we realize our own true nature. And then all duality, all plurality, all varieties will cease to exist. So there is a verse in the first chapter, Jnate dvaidam na vidyate. When you realize the supreme truth, when you experience the supreme truth, then duality ceases to exist. There is no more plurality. There is no more ignorance. In Vedanta, this is an important point to remember. Whenever we see more than one, it is unreal. We are in a state of ignorance. Whenever we see only one reality, then that is true. That is true knowledge. So the plurality, the duality, or the state of seeing more than one corresponds to ignorance, and the state of experiencing the one corresponds to knowledge. And when we realize this one reality, how do we know that? As I explained earlier, this knowledge is not empirical knowledge. This knowledge is not objectified knowledge. You can see a book, you can read, you can recognize an object. So that recognition brings an information, a knowledge to your mind, which means what you know becomes the object and you become the subject. So the object of knowledge is objectified by the subject who knows the object. This is with regard to empirical phenomenal knowledge. Now, in Vedanta, the word knowledge is used. This is a very important point, because language is always a very inadequate, imperfect tool or instrument for expressing higher metaphysics. Now, when you get the real knowledge, there is no duality. Here we have to remember, when we get the real knowledge, that part of the sentence should be clearly explained. We are not knowing something. We are actually experiencing our own true nature. This experience is what is meant by knowledge when we say we realize we know the supreme truth. And then what happens? Then we realize we are ourselves non-distinct and non-different from the true reality that we realize. And then there is no duality, no plurality. Now, this idea was explained in the first chapter of Mandukya Karika, in which the author Gaudapada expounded, elaborately described this Vedantic truth in the light of scriptures, in the light of scriptural knowledge, quoting or referring to various branches of learning, depending not only on logic but also philosophy and theology. In the second chapter, Gaudapada is changing his approach towards the topic of discussion. He approaches this topic not from the standpoint of theology or books or philosophy, but from the standpoint of pure reason, pure logic. Now, logic is something neutral. You can even argue with an atheist, a nonconformist, a total non-believer. You can argue with him. You can make use of logic, because logic directly applies to the human intellect, not necessarily to what he believes or disbelieves. Now, in the second chapter, Gaudapada's plan is to refer to various schools of thought which do not recognize the Upanishads or the Vedas as scriptures, which actually do not accept verbal testimony. That's a third tool from an epistemological point of view, that is direct perception, inference, verbal testimony, comparison, presumption, and absence. These are the 6 tools, epistemological tools, which Gaudapada uses. In Sanskrit, it's called pratyaksha, direct perception; anumana is inference; shabda pramana is verbal testimony; and then comparison; and then arthabhati is presumption; and absence is abhava. So this I already explained. Now Gaudapada is here referring to many schools of thoughts which hold a view that Atman is not the ultimate reality. Instead of recognizing Atman or Brahman or Turiya as the absolute reality, they posit different entities, different superimpositions they put forward. Some of them argue that prana is the absolute reality. Some of them argue that Purusha and Prakriti, these are the 2 absolute categories in the Sankhya philosophy, are the absolute realities. Dharma is absolute reality, and so on. 35 different schools, different views are referred to in this Karika by Gaudapada. This is the background. So we are actually going through all these 35 different views, different schools of thought. Not all of them are well-established streams of thought. Some of them are just fringe schools, just renegade schools of philosophy. Some of them had huge following, like the Mimamsakas, Sankhyas, Yogas, etc. And some of them were just confined to a small group of academics of that particular age. So, I think in this process, perhaps I was referring to the 28th verse. I think that is what I referred to, 28th verse. Or no, perhaps 27th verse. I was referring to the 27th verse of the 2nd chapter. The 27th verse begins like this: Lokan lokavidaha. See, according to, I shall explain. Lokan lokavidaha prahu asrama iti chatadvidaha stripum nabumsakam laingaha paraparamatha pare. This is the verse. I should just split the verse and then explain if verse. So lokan lokavidaha asramaha iti tadvidaha prahu stripum nabumsakam laingaha atha paraparam apare prahu. This is the Anvaya or prose order. Now we will come to the text. Now, some people believe that pleasing, the attaining different lokas is the ultimate goal of human life. That means you have to please other people. Pleasing other people. Some who live in this world, be a very good diplomat, try to please everyone. There is nothing beyond that. That means some kind of highly refined social order. That's enough. You need not worry about any transcendental ideas, spiritual or metaphysical ideas. This world is real. The senses are real. The objects of enjoyment are real. And for that, you have to follow some kind of orderliness, a sense of orderliness and discipline, which will help you to enjoy the world better. So the world is real. Objects of enjoyment are real. And enjoyment of different objects of enjoyment is the ultimate goal of human life. Therefore, Tattva means the ultimate principle, the guiding principle of human existence is try to be a pleasing, good man. Talk to everyone perfectly nicely as a gentleman and try to please everyone. In fact, I tell you, there is a great statement in Swami Tattwamayananda's book on meditation and spiritual practice. A very well-known book. In fact, many of these ideas were expressed by him when he was spreading Vedanta in the West, in Europe and in America. So he says, if somebody is trying to please everyone, you have to be careful about him. Because either he is a crook number one, he can play different roles, or he may be a great saint. Because a great saint, you see, a great saint has no enemy. Sajata Shatruhu is a term used to designate a great spiritual personality. The literal translation is somebody who has no enemy, somebody whose enemy has not yet been born, which means he has no enemy. But he may have many people who may consider him as their enemy, but for him, so far as he is concerned, there is no enemy. But it is a result of an intuitive inner spiritual growth. It is not a result of playing the diplomat. It's not that. It is the natural expansion of the human heart which comes to a spiritual person when he approaches his spiritual goal. As he approaches his own inner reality, as a spiritual aspirant realizes that in all living beings, this Atman, this Brahman, this Supreme Consciousness is the immanent principle, including himself. Along with that, his heart also expands as he approaches closer and closer towards his own inner reality. In direct proportion to his own inner spiritual growth, there is an outer external spiritual expansion. He looks upon entire creation as one spiritual family. Now, this is one thing. But if somebody tries to please everyone, you should not trust him. But then, in those days, maybe in 6th century, Gaudapada lived maybe in the later 7th century, early part of 8th century, somewhat. Now, there must have been some schools of thought who propagated the idea, don't worry about any fundamental ethical, metaphysical or spiritual questions. Just lead a happy life in this world and try to enjoy maximum pleasure. It's a kind of refined utilitarianism. In fact, J.S. Mill also lays down some fundamental points of ethics. J.S. Mill is credited with laying down some fundamental, purely empirical principles of ethics, but only for enjoying this world. It's a kind of enjoying this world. So maybe these people may have belonged to that category. So loka here means pleasing other people as reality. That reality means there is nothing beyond, life doesn't mean anything beyond leading a life trying to please everyone so that you can have the best of this world. That's all. Therefore, but this idea cannot be real. Gaudapada hints that people have various tastes and temperaments. Even God cannot please everyone. You find the stories of ancient mythological books. God incarnated in various forms in different cultures and different nations. Jesus was crucified, Lord Krishna had to face problems, Lord Rama had to face problems, and Sri Ramakrishna in our own times had to face problems. So wherever you find stories, mythological stories or historical events related to God incarnating as human beings, you find that even they have to face problems. So Gaudapada hints that even God cannot please everyone. Therefore, this kind of refined utilitarianism cannot be cannot be acceptable from a logical point of view. And then the next is this, see, asrama iti tadvidaha. Now, in fact, this is a reference to certain constitutional experts who lived in ancient India. In Vedantic tradition, scriptures, books or canonical literature are divided into three categories. This is a basic point to remember. One, the basic fundamental metaphysical spiritual scriptures, mainly Upanishads, which form part of the Veda. Second, law books, roughly they correspond to modern constitutions. Right from 8th or 9th century BC up to around 2nd century AD, almost for about 1,000 years, this period is known as the period of the Smritis. In fact, the Sanskrit name for these law books is Smriti. And the Sanskrit name for the fundamental philosophical spiritual books like Upanishads is Shruti. This is a point to remember. So Shruti means the fundamental spiritual metaphysical works, mostly the Upanishads. And Smriti means roughly constitutions, law books, Manu, Yajnavalkya and all that. So those of you who may have been students of law will be surprised. In some of these law books, there are advanced ideas which are an inspiration to modern constitutional experts. I can give you an example. You see, capital punishment was banned in modern democratic countries only in very recent times. But Manu says there should be no capital punishment in any cases except an extremely criminal, in the case of an extremely criminal action involving treason or an attempt in the life of the king. That means there should be no capital punishment for small crimes. Mahatsobi abaradeshu dandam pranandigam tyajet rute rajadhigaratu yukta danda prakirtidaha. Somehow it comes to my mind. I read long back. Manusmriti says, Mahatsobi abaradeshu dandam pranandigam tyajet rute rajadhigaratu yukta danda prakirtidaha. Though the subject is not very closely related to Vedanta, you'll be surprised to know. In this verse, Manu, the great lawgiver who lived maybe 9th or 8th century BC, and according to some historians, both Western and Eastern, Western Indologists and also Eastern, Indian historians, Manu belonged to 2nd millennium BC. But at least, if you bring him forward, he must have lived around 8th or 9th century BC. In that book, Manu says there should be no capital punishment. Pranandigam danda means a capital punishment involving death sentence. He says there should be no capital punishment in any of the minor crimes. Only in one crime, one type of crime, you can have capital punishment, death sentence. And that is a crime involving an attempt on the life of the king or a treason. Just I'm giving an example. So these are the second type of books, law books. And the third type of books are called mythological books. In Vedantic tradition, the entire canonical literature is divided into three categories. The highest and the most authentic type of books are Upanishads, which are called Shruti, which contains the highest philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual ideas, questions about the existence of God, the real meaning of human life, and ultimate goal of human existence. These are some of the fundamental questions discussed in the Upanishads. Not about a personal God or anything. The second type of books are called law books, which are called Smritis. Some of them are extremely advanced. For example, property succession, laws, clauses related to property succession, divorces, the institution of marriage. All these are discussed in Smritis, law books written, Yajnavalkya Smriti elaborately deals with written around 6th century BC. And the third type of books are Puranas, mythological books. You can compare some of these Puranas to Homer's Iliad or Odyssey or Virgil's Aeneid and so on. So I'm just giving an example. Now, according to some philosophers, the instructions laid down in these law books are the fundamental values of human life. In these law books, 4 levels of life are explained, which is called 4 ashramas, Chaturashrama. That is, Brahmacharya means the state when a young person, boy or girl, should undergo instruction under a competent teacher. This is called Brahmacharya ashrama. Next is Grihastha ashrama, means after completion of education, around 24th year, that person who has completed his instruction under a teacher should marry and become an householder. He will have received proper instruction on the duties related to the life of an ideal householder, how he should look after his children, look after his parents, and how he should become an enlightened citizen of a country, a law-abiding, enlightened citizen of a country. This is the second ashrama, second stage in the life of a person. So Garhasthya means the stage of householdership. The third state is Vanaprastha, means a person who gets old and gets his face wrinkled, his or her, both are applicable, and hair become grey. Instead of keeping the hair black, jet black, using dye powder, whatever you may call, of blackening the hair and whitening the teeth, such an aged man, when he reaches an advanced age in his life, should lead the rest of his life in contemplation, meditation, and spiritual training, reading holy books, meditation, contemplation, and so on. So, and such people normally used to go to forest regions, forest hermitages. So it is called Vanaprasthasrama. Vanaprasthasrama means somebody who makes a move, who starts living the life of a Vanaprasthin, somebody who has completed his Brahmacharyasrama and then married, has done all the duties and responsibilities towards his children, and has seen grandchild. If an householder sees the face of his grandchild and finds that his hair has gone grey and his face has become wrinkled, he should take to the third stage of human life, that is the stage of meditation and contemplation. Manu says, Grihasthasya idapasye vali palidam atmanaha apatyasya apatyam tada aranyam samasayed. Manu gives the lawgiver. Manu, as I told you, he may have lived around 9th century BC. There he gives a clear instruction as to how an householder should lead an ideal life. When he finds that his hair has gone grey and his face has become wrinkled, and when he sees the face of his grandson or grandchildren, which shows that the family tradition will be continued, which means he has completed, perfected his duties as an householder. Then he should go to a place for contemplation. He can go to a temple, he can go to a church or a place of worship, or if that is not possible, in his own home, he can set apart a room for spending his time in contemplation, meditation, or do some charitable work for somebody else. This is also mentioned. Now, this is the third stage in the life of an householder. The fourth stage is sannyasa, means the life of renunciation. One should become a mendicant, which means after having completed the stage of introspection and meditation, leading the life of a recluse, he should finally renounce all his desires and leave everything to God, lead a life exclusively devoted to spiritual practices. This is sannyasa, means the stage of mendicancy. Now, what Gaudapada says? Gaudapada is in perfect agreement with all these ideas. What he hints at is this. This is not the only reality. If people tell you that you just lead a life going through these four stages of life, you need not worry about God, Atman, or consciousness of, or any ontological absolute principle. You need not worry about those things, spiritual values. Just mechanically lead a life of these four asamas, four stages. That is enough. This view was prevalent among certain people. Gaudapada says that is absolutely wrong. That's a point to remember. So asrama iti, that's we see, you can find here in the 27th verse, asrama iti cha tadvidaha. Asrama means, asrama actually means chadurasama. Four asamas, four stages in the life of an householder. The first stage, when you are a brahmachari, you are a novitiate. And you are a novitiate, you have to study the holy scriptures, you have to study the principles of ethics, so that you could live a responsible life as an ideal husband, or an ideal wife, or ideal mother, or ideal father, ideal son, an ideal citizen of the country, a law-abiding, enlightened citizen of the country. For this, a training is required. That training is imparted during the period of novitiate. This is the first stage. Second, the first asrama. The second stage is the stage of an householder. When a person is allowed to marry and lead a proper life, a responsible life of an householder, he has got some duties and responsibilities towards his or her husbands or wife, and also towards their parents, and also towards their children. And then, when they get old, they should take to a life of complete contemplation and meditation. Means withdraw from the active life of an householder. And when this stage also reaches its perfection, that householder who has completed his stage of vanaprastha, means the third stage of introspection or meditation, he should take to a life of renunciation, which is called the stage of sannyasa. Now, Gaudapada says there are some people who argue you just mechanically lead this life. Don't worry about the absolute reality, God or Advaita or anything. There are such people. Gaudapada says they are wrong. That's the idea behind. So that's why the 27th verse, Lokan Lokavidaha Prakuhu Asrama idi Tadvidaha Stripum Nabumsagam Laingaha. Now, this is a very interesting group of people. Say, three genders, feminine, masculine, neuter gender. They are very important from the standpoint of grammar, and especially if those of you who study Sanskrit language will understand. These three genders, every object has either feminine gender, neuter gender, and masculine gender. These are three genders in Sanskrit language. Now, according to some commentators who have written commentaries on these verses, they argue that this is a reference to certain people who believed that all objects, beings, and everything in this world should be analyzed from the standpoint of grammar. Those who believe that there is no higher principle other than spoken or written word. Everything, every thought process has got a corresponding word. You have to remember one important principle. Their important argument is, see, every thought has got a corresponding word dimension. And every word has got a thought dimension. When you think of an object, it is impossible for you to think of that object without forming in your mind the idea of a word which corresponds to that particular object. And again, when you name an object using a word, that also is the result of a thought process within. So, human contemplation and its verbal expression, which is divided into three genders. Remember, from the Sanskrit standpoint, from the standpoint of Sanskrit grammar. This is the whole of human life. There is nothing beyond that. You'll be surprised to know, even now in India, there are great grammarians who make a cult of study of Sanskrit grammar. Of course, their number is slowly getting reduced. Panini was the great grammarian who wrote one of the most wonderful creation of human genius is called Ashtadhyayi, a Sanskrit, the Bible of Sanskrit grammar. It could be called the Bible of Sanskrit grammar. It is supposed to be one of the miraculous products of human intellect by many Western grammarians also, because nothing like that ever existed in any other language in the world. But the point is, that's not the point now of a subject of discussion. The point is this: there have been people who thought that that the only object of human life, the only fulfillment of human life, is to make a proper study of grammar. Nothing beyond that. They didn't believe in God. In fact, for them, the great grammarians of ancient times were gods. They were deified. They were divinized by these great grammarians. There were not many. It is asserted by the commentators that Gaudapada is here, the author of this text, Gaudapada Karika, is here referring to a school of grammarians who argued that there is nothing in this world other than study of grammar. Okay. Now, so Lainkaha, para, aparam tatha apare. This is a reference to some verses in the Prashna Upanishad. Prashna Upanishad is one of the 10 Upanishads on which Shankaracharya wrote commentaries. So in the Prashna Upanishad, Brahman or ultimate reality is referred to as para and apara. Para means the supreme, apara means secondary. So apara Brahman means the understanding of the absolute, impersonal, formless, attributeless reality as personal and with form. So the absolute reality in its true nature is devoid of any form. It is beyond any form, beyond any attributes. It cannot be defined or explained. But this fact can be realized only by an enlightened spiritual aspirant. Those who are not enlightened enough may get an incomplete picture of the absolute reality. So they would think that the absolute reality is a personal God with a name, with certain characteristics, with form, and with certain attributes. So this idea. In fact, this is the secondary view. So the absolute view is para and the secondary view is apara. These are the two ideas mentioned here. Anyway, we are coming to the end of this long discussion, so perhaps the Karika, the text, enters a much more interesting part after this 28th verse. The 28th verse is the last verse, giving a long description of these 35 types of superimpositions corresponding to 35 different schools of philosophical systems. Now, 28th verse is Srishtihi idi srishtividaha, laya idi cha tadvidaha, sthitiriti sthitividaha, sarvecha ihatadu sarvada. I shall read the prose order. Srishtihi iti srishtividaha, layaha iti tadvidaha, sthitih iti sthitividaha, prahu sarvecha sarvada ihatu kalpita. Now, there is another view. Srishti means creation. Srishti actually means creation. You have to remember, in Vedantic tradition, Srishti is not what we normally mean by the word creation, either in the Bible or in any of the theological books of Abrahamic religions. But that's the only way we can translate. Sometimes the word Srishtihi is translated as projection. So, the view is this: in Vedanta, the world doesn't come out of absolute non-existence. What we call projection or creation is nothing but the manifestation in gross form of a reality from its subtle form. Before creation, it was in its subtle form. When the so-called creation takes place, it begins to manifest in its gross visible form. So what is Srishti? Srishti is nothing but the manifestation of the subtle reality in its gross form. When it was in its subtle form, it was not visible. When it begins to manifest in its gross form, it begins to manifest. Well, Let us, if you believe in Big Bang, where was this earth, say, before Big Bang, millions of years back? We can't say. Where was this world before Big Bang? After all, something happened. You call it explosion, Big Bang, whatever it is. And the world in which we are living today began to take shape. But this world did exist in another form, which underwent this process of Big Bang or explosion, whatever you may call. So, this earth or this world is nothing but the manifestation in gross form of something which was in a subtle form before this manifestation. This is the Vedantic view. So, projection or manifestation of the subtle in gross form is creation. And again, when this external entity, this manifested gross world, goes back to its subtle form, it is called dissolution. After all, this earth must have existed in some form before the Big Bang. God cannot sit somewhere on a fine morning and create this world out of nothingness. That is a Vedantic view. Vedanta doesn't accept this view. In popular Hindu tradition, many of the mythological books, especially the Puranas, what we call mythological books, they do explain creation of this world almost as it is explained in many of the Abrahamic scriptures of Abrahamic religions. But in the Upanishadic literature, in the Vedantic literature, the approach is entirely different. This world in which we live is nothing but manifestation in gross form of something which was in subtle form before this manifestation. And this gross form will go back to its subtle form, which is called dissolution. And again, it will again manifest as gross form. It is again creation. So this is the cyclic, this is called the cyclicism in Vedantic ontology. It's called cyclicism. Everything takes place, moves in a cycle, not in a straight line progression. Okay. This is an important idea we have to remember. But anyhow, Gaudapada is here referring to some schools of popular Hindu religion who were mostly believers in the mythological stories of Puranas, where the creation of the world is explained. So he doesn't accept that view. Srishti idit srishti vidaha, laya idit advidaha. Laya means dissolution. So one day the world was created by God, and then the world will cease to exist. But again, you have to remember, these two words are used in a totally different sense in Vedantic philosophy, in which srishti or creation means manifestation of the subtle in gross form, and laya or dissolution means going back of this gross to its subtle form. Sthiti vidaha. Sthiti means existence. The existence of this gross manifestation is called sthiti, existence. Then sarvecha ihatu idu sarvada. Like that, there are so many innumerable types of views in this world. That's how Gaudapada concludes. All these are false cognitions, superimpositions. As I said earlier, Shankaracharya doesn't write any commentary on these verses. And in one context, he gives a reason. Indirectly, he hints why he did not write any commentary on these 9 verses from 20 to 28th verse, in which Gaudapada has outlined 35 different philosophical views current in his age. Now, as I said, Shankaracharya says these are all false cognitions or superimpositions. If you go back to the old rope snake analogy, you have to remember again an object lying coiled up in a room where there is not enough light. You mistake it to be a snake, your friend mistake it to be a piece of wood or a stick, and another person may mistake it to be a thin stream of water, and a third person may mistake it to be a crack on the floor. And maybe if there are 100 people may have 100 different mistaken notions because they don't know that it is a piece of rope. Now, there is no point in explaining all these superimpositions because all of them are equally wrong. The person who mistakes the rope to be the snake is wrong, and the person who mistakes the same rope to be a stick is also wrong, because when you bring light, all of them will correct their views, they will get the correct understanding, they will recognize that object to be a piece of rope. So, after bringing the light, nobody will argue. There will be no debate on the accuracy or inaccuracy of these various superimpositions, these various wrong notions. So Gaudapada here says, all these people are totally mistaken, equally mistaken, because their views are totally wrong. Therefore, there is no point in elaborating these views. Of course, the traditional commentators will tell you that those who believe that creation or the one responsible for creation of the universe is absolute reality. Brahma is the mythological creator of this universe. Or who is responsible for sthiti or sustenance? Vishnu, who protects the universe. And Shiva is the destroyer of the universe. Like that, various views among the popular Pauranikas, those who take these mythological works as the ultimate authority, those who completely ignore the views of the Upanishadic texts, they have got various views. All these views are absolutely wrong. They hold all these wrong views only because of the fact that they are not aware of the truth. What is the truth? The truth is that Atman, Brahman or consciousness is the only reality. Just as various people mistake the rope to be many things other than the rope because they are not aware of the fact that it is a piece of rope. Similarly, people who are not aware of the truth of Advaita, truth of non-dualist philosophy, will have various views, but they are all equally wrong. This is the conclusion of Gaudapada. So with the 28th verse, we are coming to the end of a very important discussion from a philosophical point of view, from the standpoint of comparative philosophy. This is a very, very interesting part of the text. So we already, if you have 5 minutes, if any of you have got any views, any points to be clarified, I shall be happy to try it. Any ideas? From 29th verse onwards, we are returning to the subject of Vedantic philosophy. Gaudapada was just referring to various schools of thought prevalent during his times in the 6th or 7th century AD. Okay. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.